Call of Duty is a storied franchise, with more than its fair share of promoters and detractors. Perhaps above all else, it's a series criticized for a lack of ambition. After so many games and so many years, this series has entered a rhythm, which for a good portion of people lacks spark. It lacks urgency. It lacks a drive to push the envelope forward. It's funny though, because while replaying the original Modern Warfare Trilogy, ambition is one of the first things that comes to my mind. This series is bold. It takes risks. Ambition can be dangerous though. We've all seen cases where developers bite off more than they can chew, where manpower or talent can't hope to match the developer's vision. The original Modern Warfare Trilogy somehow, even impossibly, avoids this fate despite its great ambition. The drive to reach new heights is met with equal talent and craftsmanship. It's remarkable, really. And even though the series starts to stumble with the weight of ambition near its end, the series never falls. Despite its flaws, the Modern Warfare Trilogy is one of the best first-person shooter trilogies of all time. In this retrospective, we're going to dive into each Modern Warfare game. We're going to look at the masterful craftsmanship of each game, the supreme command over pacing, and how the roller coaster each game embodies is so fine-tuned. We're going to look at how this craftsmanship allows the developer's ambition to shine through, as the series pushes to amaze, excite, and even horrify you. With that, let's jump into COD 4 Modern Warfare. Modern Warfare starts with a debrief screen where one of the SAS operators, Gaz, gives us a summary of the situation. In short, things aren't good. The world is on the brink of falling apart. Russia's at civil war, with government loyalists against ultranationalist rebels, and there are thousands of nukes at stake.
Good news first, the world's in great shape. We've got a civil war in Russia, government loyalists against ultranationalist rebels, and 15,000 nukes at stake.
Just another day at the office.
Already, we see the personality of the SAS team shine through. Gaz and Captain Price are characterized by an unshakable, stubborn bravery, paired with a wry sarcasm, both of which will serve them soon. Meanwhile, the Middle East is also on the brink of conflict, with a man named Al-Assad gunning for top spot. That's not great news either. And perhaps the worst news of all follows. SAS has a new recruit, one Soap McTavish. This is where we step in, through the shoes of Soap. In a classified warehouse, he goes through a training regimen, and we as the player get acclimated to the controls.
Knife the watermelon. Nice! Your fruit-killing skills are remarkable.
Next, Soap meets with Captain Price. Price isn't exactly nice to him, showing his trademark wry, biting speech.
Right. What the hell kind of name is Soap, eh? How'd a muppet like you pass selection?
Soap is in the classic new recruit situation where he's the lowest dog on the food chain, and he's certainly treated like it. These are hard men who like a trial by fire more than anything else. Respect isn't given, but it's earned. He runs through the training course, and we put our newly acquired skills to the test. A really cool part of this training sequence is that the game will suggest what difficulty to play on based on your time. This is great because it helps players decide what difficulty is right for them, and it's something I wish I saw more games do. However, it's also very motivating to run through the training course again and again. The first time through, I completely botched it, and ended up getting suggested the recruit difficulty, which is the lowest one.
Pretty good, Soap, but I've seen better. Climb up the ladder if you want another go.
I took this as a personal slight, and I made it my mission to get at least recommended the third difficulty hardened. So I ran the course until I got my goal.
That was an improvement, but it's not hard to improve on garbage. Try it again.
I suspect I'm not the only person who's done this, so I think this training exercise and this difficulty suggestion is a great way of getting the player into the shoes of a special operator, training over and over again until achieving a satisfactory result. With training complete, Soap embarks on his first operation. They are to retrieve a package from a cargo ship, courtesy of intel from a Russian informant. They head to the Bering Strait. The waters are rough, dangerous looking even. Captain Price remains unfazed, smoking a cigar casually amidst the storm. This image, I think, sums up Captain Price's personality perfectly. Modern Warfare isn't as focused on character building as some other games, but still moments like these throughout the game leave you with a very clear understanding of who the characters are, especially Price. They rappel onto the ship and the operation begins. One of my favorite details is that the training room from earlier is a replica of the cargo ship's layout. You weren't just training, you were training specifically for this op. and it demonstrates how much work and perfectionism go into SAS's operations. They make their way through the ship, taking out threats along the way. It's incredibly immersive as you move with the SAS. Their movements are a well-oiled machine, and you're just one cog within it. They retrieve the shipping manifest they were after, but bad news follows. The ship is capsizing. They make a desperate exit as the ship floods, and you're left disoriented, walking through hallways with the walls tilting this way and that. They make it back to the helicopter with not a moment to spare, as Soap nearly falls off the back. Price grabs him and hauls him back into the ship. This mission is expertly paced. It starts slowly, creeping through corridors and sneakily taking out enemies, and it steadily builds to open combat before the final conclusion. Stellar mission pacing will be a theme throughout the game, and so will the pacing between missions, but I'll get more into that as we go along. We are transported halfway across the world into the shoes of Al-Fulani. The president is not in a good situation. He's handcuffed and unceremoniously dumped into the back of a vehicle, with a little love tap to send him on his way. The president gets a scowl by the man in the passenger seat. This is Viktor Zakayev, who will become important later in the story. The ride is devoid of conversation. Over loudspeakers, the president hears al-Assad giving a speech about delivering the nation to its former glory. If you recall from earlier, al-Assad is the number 2 man, gunning for the top spot. We're playing as the president who is held prisoner. The calculus does not look good here. This car ride is long, almost excessively so. It lasts multiple minutes. One reason for this is that the drive serves as the opening credits scroll. However, the length also builds suspense. The player is left to simmer and imagine the fate in store, and as al-Assad's speech continues, you dread what lay at the end of this ride. The slow pacing here also works well because it's in stark contrast to the ending of the prior mission. The player just finished a high-intensity escape from a carrier ship. Following that up with a slow car ride is an abrupt halting of that speed, and it makes the slowness and dread even more pronounced. This is a great example of what I mean about the game using contrast and pacing very effectively. The president reaches the end of the road. He's dragged into a courtyard with al-Assad, who is finishing his speech. The dread continues to build. A one-armed man in the background hands al-Assad a pistol. This body language is telling. Al-Assad isn't the one in charge. He's being given power by the shadowy individual who is really pulling the strings. This is a great little piece of visual storytelling. Al-Assad doesn't waste any time. He pulls the trigger. Gaz earlier described a world on the brink of conflict. This execution here is the ignition. The Americans plan movements on this al-Assad. Meanwhile, the SAS has even more pressing matters. Nikolai, the ultra-nationalist informant from the cargo ship op, is going to be executed. Price and his men have to bail him out. This mission has a similar pacing to the first. It starts slowly with stealth before developing into open combat. This pattern gives each mission a nice feeling of progression in of itself. It's worth noting that the build-up is faster, and the combat is of a larger scale, with the Russian loyalists joining your side against the contingency of ultranationalists. This pacing matches the building stakes of the story. There are also a couple of little details I enjoy here. For instance, the president's execution can be seen on the news within one of the houses. Details like this help build immersion and make the world feel more cohesive. Soap and his allies infiltrate a house with a cool night vision segment, and they capture Nikolai. He asks if the Americans have begun their invasion to capture al-Assad yet. He says they're about to make a big mistake.
The Americans already attacked al-Assad.
No, their invasion begins in a few hours. Why?
The Americans are making mistake. They will never take al-Assad alive.
This moment builds tension significantly, and it has ripple effects on the next mission. In the next mission, the player switches perspective again, this time into the shoes of Sergeant Paul Jackson of the US Marines First Force Recon Company. That upcoming US invasion, well, it's here. There is an absolute swarm of helicopters joining Jackson's. The US forces feel overwhelming. You're one drop in an absolute tsunami that is about to hit its enemies. The mission is ambitious and straightforward. Al-Assad is thought to be in one of the buildings. The US forces are about to get him, and end al-Assad's reign quickly. Jackson descends to the battlefield. The sky is crisp and blue, and the environment is bright. I bring these up for contrast later. Jackson clears the buildings methodically with his fellow Marines. That feeling of being part of a tsunami continues. However, this feeling of power brings with it a sense of dread. Nikolai said that the Americans were making a huge mistake. With how dominating the US forces feel, how could this be a mistake? What exactly are we about to walk into? This unease is heightened when the Marines reach the broadcast station where al-Assad was thought to be broadcasting live. It turns out that was just a recording playing on a loop. The Americans fell for the ruse, hook, line, and sinker. There isn't an immediate fallout, but it creates this feeling that you're not entirely in control here. The Marines receive new mission orders, so they head out. On the next mission debrief, a newscaster summarizes the battle. The US forces faced an entire day of heavy fighting. Already, this is a departure from the simple smash and grab plan to get al-Assad to end this thing in a matter of hours. The next mission's objective also reflects this deterioration. There is a tank stuck, callsign Warpig. Jackson and his fellow Marines are to secure it. Rescuing a tank from a ditch is a far cry from a prior mission's ambition. The mission begins under a dark, foreboding sky, filled with smoke and fire from the conflict. The buildings have crumbled, mortared out. Lastly, the Marines are in the disadvantaged position, with their enemies freely firing on them from above. Jackson has to fight tooth and nail to secure the building. This starkly contrasts with the prior mission's crisp blue sky and overall clean feeling. Once more, the contrasting of elements is used to great effect to communicate a sense of disorder. Despite the chaos, the Marines manage to secure the tank. It's a small victory in this lengthening conflict. Perspective once again switches to Price's team. They're escorting Nikolai to a safe house, but their chopper is downed by an incoming missile. Soap awakens in the wreckage of the chopper. Their enemies are converging, and they need to get Nikolai out. The mission, aptly titled Hunted, sees the SAS make their escape while helicopters scour overhead. Enemies encroach and dogs hound them. The SAS in the prior missions have been depicted as always in control of the situation, so seeing them on the back foot feels strange. Their misfortune also matches the deterioration of the situation in the Middle East. Things in general are getting worse. Pacing again is used to great effect to communicate a growing sense of unease. Air support arrives to help them out. The next mission transfers to the AC-130's perspective. The player takes control of the gunship and is tasked with protecting the SAS as they escort Nikolai out. The player views the world below through the detached blacks and whites of thermal vision. Enemies are reduced to white ants, easily stomped on by the AC-130's array of weaponry. It's actually a bit disconcerting how removed you are from the conflict as enemies fall from your fingertips. I think this effect works so well because of one of my favorite words in this video, contrast. The prior mission saw both the SAS and the Marines in hard situations, fighting tooth and nail for every inch of ground. You felt the struggle and the chaos of those situations, up close and personal. This abrupt change to a ship that's eerily quiet with nary a sound except the AC-130's own guns firing is like a cold bucket of water being splashed on your face. It's a shock to the system.
Yeah, direct hit's right there. Tracking. Kaboom.
Although I wouldn't classify this game as some deep commentary on war, and that type of analysis is not really where I want to go with this video, this mission nonetheless is a powerful depiction of modern war. It makes you reflect on just how far technology has come, for good or ill. There's a reason this mission is so iconic. Aside from this detachment, the mission is incredibly immersive, in large part due to the chatter between the operators. There are small details which add to the authenticity. For instance, you're given explicit orders not to target the church.
Personnel approaching from the church. Request permission to engage.
Copy. You are cleared to engage the moving vehicle and any personnel around you see.
Affirmative. Crew, you are cleared to engage, but do not fire on the church.
Hot damn!
I could be wrong on the reason why here, but I'm pretty sure it's against the rules of war to target religious institutions, so the operators are avoiding it to avoid committing a war crime. Feel free to correct me if that's wrong in the comments. The SAS soldiers manage to exfil on a helicopter. The mission is saved. Perspective switches back to Sergeant Paul Jackson of the Marines. With the tank secured and repaired, the Marines push towards the capital with the new location that al-Assad is thought to be hiding. There's a bit of uncertainty this time with the mission. Intel was wrong last time, and it's definitely possible that it's wrong again. Nonetheless, the Marines push on. With the power of the Abrams tank at your side, the odds once again fall back in the player's favor. You were prey for a little while, but now you're once again the predator. Just like the last mission with the SAS. The Marines continue their push into the next mission. Al-Assad is thought to be in the palace and the Marines are closing in on him. However, there's an additional piece of disconcerting intel. Al-Assad may have a Russian warhead. Speed is especially critical. The player takes the shoes of Sergeant Paul Jackson once more. He's in the seat of a chopper wielding a Mark 19 grenade launcher. He's tasked with taking out any ground troops that bother the helicopters, and with the launcher it's an easy task. Once more, there's a feeling of superior power over your enemies. Yet, there is still an undercurrent of unease, and that is conveyed largely by color. Everything has an orange hazy tint, giving off signals of warning. Jackson disengages and fights through ground troops before they're given the order to fall back. SEAL Team 6 has located the suspected nuclear device, and while nobody wants to be around that, a wrinkle emerges. Cobra pilot is shot down, and Jackson is given the order to pull her out. Nobody is getting left behind here. This mission is intense story-wise, but it's also intense gameplay-wise. Jackson has a 90-second time limit, and he has to fight through hordes of bad guys to reach the pilot. What I also like about this mission is Jackson's perspective. He's not a main actor in this part of the story. He is not a part of SEAL Team 6 or the Nuclear Emergency Support Team. All of these events he's hearing about secondhand as they try to escape the city. It conveys a sense of powerlessness that's quite befitting, and that makes the upcoming tragedy more resonant. They fail to stop the nuke. The sky behind Jackson implodes, creating the trademark mushroom cloud as a sweeping fire sends Jackson's helicopter down. The mission abruptly ends. As the next level loads in, a clamor of news correspondents relay their shock, and it's effective at communicating the confusion and horror from the event.
A nuclear explosion in his own country.
Names scroll down the screen, listing all of the servicemen and women who are MIA. Sergeant Paul Jackson is among them. However, we come to learn that the sergeant is actually alive. We take his perspective once more in the crashed helicopter. When he comes to, there's a moment of hope. Jackson is one of our heroes after all. Of course it makes sense that he would survive. We can't see anything from the helicopter. That hope abruptly dissipates when Jackson crawls out and we witness the absolute catastrophe. It's an apocalyptic vision of all senses of the word. The sky's ash, soot, and darkness. And in the middle of the destruction, the mushroom cloud looms. Jackson dies, surrounded by the bodies of his fellow countrymen. This mission is a shock to the system. So far, the game has been pretty gung-ho, and it felt like the Marines would stop the threat in the nick of time. Instead, they failed, and were left with the ashes. Tension is palpable, because we know the fallout will extend well past the conflict with Al-Assad. With Jackson KIA, perspective switches back to Soap and the SAS. Nikolai, our informant, is confident that Al-Assad wouldn't sacrifice himself. He wasn't in the palace, and Nikolai believes he's hiding out in a safe house in Azerbaijan. Price and his men head out to get him. This mission contrasts really well against the prior mission. Instead of the oranges and browns, we're treated to the cool blue night. The mission is quieter, at least at first. And instead of being heavily scripted, it's a bit more open-ended, with Soap searching through houses within the village for Al-Assad. This mission, although having high-intensity combat, is a bit of a breather, and it does well for the game's pacing. Once more, pacing and contrast are used masterfully. Eventually they find Al-Assad, and Price goes to work interrogating him. He asks where Al-Assad got the bomb. Al-Assad, as you can expect, is tight-lipped, but then his phone receives a call. Price listens for 1 second before he shoots Al-Assad in the head. He recognizes the voice.
Who was that, sir?
Zakhaev. Imran Zakhaev.
Price has a history with the man, and it all started back 15 years ago in Chernobyl. Price explains.
I was just a lieutenant back then, doing some wet work. Chernobyl, Christmas for the bad guys. Even a decade later, a lot of them still used it to get their hands on nuclear material. A lot of them, including one, Imran Zakhaev. It was the first time our government had authorized an assassination order since the Second World War. I was under the command of Captain Macmillan.
What I like about this cutscene is that it shows the remarkable consistency of Price as a character. Even 15 years ago, he was willing to assassinate a man. He's always been a guy able to wade into the darkness and do whatever it takes to stop a threat. The player takes then Lieutenant Price's shoes, and we set out with Captain Macmillan to assassinate Zakhaev. This mission, All Gillied Up, is considered by many to be the best mission in the game. In fact, it's regarded as one of the best first-person shooter missions of all time. It's incredibly immersive, as you skulk through the desolate city with Macmillan. You sneak past enemies when you can, and take them out when you can. It's a very scripted mission. Any big deviations, such as running out into the open, lead to a quick death and a checkpoint restart. You can go off script slightly if you're fast enough to avoid the consequences.
Do you have a shot on the lookout? Bloody hell, the lookout's gonna see the body. Beautiful. Go.
People have grown a distaste for scripted missions, likely due to their overuse in games since 2007, and how they take agency away from the player. However, I think All Gillied Up makes a strong case for how compelling these types of missions can be when they are constructed well. The most exhilarating part of this mission is when Price and Macmillan come across enemy soldiers in a field, and they have to avoid them. The enemies are right on top of you, and it's claustrophobic and tense. It serves as the prime example of how scripted set pieces enhance the experience. Another reason this mission works so well is because of pacing. The last mission was very open-ended and combat heavy. This slow and scripted follow-up, as a result, feels like a great change of pace. Likewise, the following mission is action heavy. All Gillied Up knows exactly how long to last, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. Price and Macmillan ascend an abandoned complex, and Price commands a high-powered Barrett while Macmillan spots. Zakhaev is far off in the distance conducting a deal. Price has one chance to make the shot. This is tense. Price has to take the wind into effect, and even the Coriolis effect because he is so far away. He needs to wait for the right opportunity where Zakhaev is free and the wind is slow, while not waiting too long and letting him escape. Price takes the shot. Zakhaev goes down and his arm flies off. He's thought to be dead, but clearly that isn't the case. Through the shot, Price announces his and Macmillan's presence to their enemies. The quiet espionage of the prior mission gives way to an explosive escape as countless enemies converge on them. It's tense and frantic as a timer communicates their diminishing escape window. Things get even worse when Macmillan is injured by a crashing helicopter. Price has to balance carrying Macmillan while also fending off incoming enemies. This all culminates in one of the most high-intensity fights in the game, as Price and Macmillan fight off hordes of troops as they anxiously await exfil. This mission capitalizes on all the build-up from the prior mission, and once more the pacing is sublime. Eventually, friendly forces arrive, and Price and Macmillan exfiltrate. With that, Price's flashback ends. We return to the current day, with the SAS in a warehouse with Al-Assad's corpse. They have no time to contemplate further. Ultra-nationalist reinforcements have arrived on their doorstep, sent courtesy of Zakhaev. Price and company need to hold their ground against the offensive and survive. This mission doesn't have much in the way of build-up. It's high-octane as the SAS is pushed further and further back by the superior force of their enemies. They hold off their enemies at the farm, waiting for exfil. They receive bad news. Their helicopters have to land at the bottom of the hill, exactly where Price's team was pushed from. They have to knife back through the opposition as a timer ticks down. This makes for two high-intensity missions back-to-back. The increasing intensity of the gameplay coincides with the rising stakes of the narrative. Price's team manages to escape, and the SAS link up with the Marines. They now know the man responsible for these attacks, Zakhaev. The question is how to find him. There is one lead, Zakhaev's son Victor. They have a location on him, and since he is the commander of the ultranationalist forces, he'll know where Dad is. The SAS and Marines set up an ambush at a gas station and they wait for Victor's convoy. Things don't go exactly to plan though, and Victor makes an escape. Soap and the joint forces chase him down, fighting through streets and eventually corner him at the top of an apartment complex. Before he can be interrogated, Victor takes his own fate into his hands. The mission appears to be a bust. Their only lead, the only one who knew where Imran Zakhaev would be, is dead. However, Price doesn't appear as downcast. Zakhaev won't take his son's death lying down. He'll emerge to answer the crime.
Oh, bloody hell. His son was our only lead, sir.
Forget it. I know the man. He won't let this go unanswered. Let's go.
Price is correct. Zakhaev emerges, capturing a missile site and giving an ultimatum to the US and British forces. They are to leave Russia immediately, or he will launch the nuclear warheads. Of course, the SAS and the Marines can't let that happen, so they head to the mountains where the site is located. One of the Marines, Sergeant Griggs, is captured, so Soap and his team rescue him. After that, they kill power to the missile facility by blowing up the power lines, enabling the other team to slip through the defenses of the facility. They continue their advance, fighting through enemy soldiers before things take a bad turn. Zakhaev launches one of the missiles. Its trajectory takes the warhead straight to the United States coastline, where it'll do untold damage, causing millions of casualties. The joint operations timetable has just been shortened. They need to abort the launch before the warheads hit. The enemy opposition significantly intensifies here, which matches the narrative climax. Despite the opposition, they manage to break into the missile launch bunker. They need to reach launch control, but it's on the other end of the bunker. Of course, there's what feels like an entire army camped out down here. This mission, No Fighting in the War Room, fires on all cylinders. The music is frenetic and intense. The countdown timer steadily ticks away on the upper corner of the screen. Enemy opposition is intense, and the close quarters fighting through the bunker is desperate and claustrophobic. So with all that in mind, this mission is designed perfectly to match the narrative climax. Soap and his allies abort the launch, and they receive confirmation that the warheads have been neutralized. But they can't celebrate quite yet. Zakhaev is making an escape, and Price isn't going to let him get away. They give chase, fighting against Zakhaev's still surmountable forces. The tables turn abruptly when an enemy Hind takes out the bridge we're traveling over.
Oh shit, he's about to take out that bridge! Stop the bloody truck! The bridge isn't gonna hold! Move, move, move!
The SAS and the Marines crawl out of the wreckage and fight against their enemies. Eventually, Soap is left injured and dazed, and his allies fall around him. When all seems lost, Price slides him a pistol. Soap puts the final bullet into Zakhaev along with his surrounding soldiers. With that, finally the threat is vanquished. Friendly Russian forces arrive. They perform CPR on Price while Soap is airlifted. As the screen fades to white, a news broadcast plays. The near calamity has been covered up, blamed on training exercises. And the search for the cargo ship at the beginning of the game has been called off. With this, we learn that neither Soap or Price, or any of their allies, will receive any accolades or affirmations for their heroic actions, despite their sacrifices, as are made plain by Soap and Price's injuries. However, from all the player has seen of Price, it is doubtful that he would prefer it any other way. He is a man that does the job that needs to be done, and that's all there is to it. The game leaves us wondering what will happen to Price and Soap, as well as wondering about the world stage as a whole. On this celebratory yet somber note, Modern Warfare ends. We see even in Modern Warfare's end, contrast plays a big role. The joy of victory is contrasted with the injuries of the men involved and the uncertainty of the world stage. Modern Warfare is a game that remains captivating many years after its release. It remains captivating even after many playthroughs, as I've discovered myself. Modern Warfare is a game crafted with unparalleled precision and intention. The pacing is perfect throughout its runtime, and the clever use of contrast makes every moment land with a weighty punch. It's not hard to see why Modern Warfare is listed as one of the best first-person shooter campaigns of all time, and I suspect it's a game that will continue to be talked about and analyzed for years to come. And with that, we move on to Modern Warfare 2. Modern Warfare is considered one of the greatest FPS shooter campaigns of all time. To top it is, to put it simply, a tough task. Did its sequel, Modern Warfare 2, manage to do it? Well, it depends on who you ask. For some, Modern Warfare 2 is a bigger and better game, taking all the elements of Modern Warfare and cranking them up to 11. For others, Modern Warfare 2 represents jumping the shark, the Michael Bayification of a series that once felt grounded, turning it into something so high-octane that it loses impact. Where do I stand? Well, I won't try to hide the ball. Modern Warfare 2 is my favorite campaign in the Call of Duty series. In fact, it might be my favorite first-person shooter campaign of all time. It's neck and neck with a few other titles for sure, and my favorite really depends on what day you ask me. However, with that said, I nonetheless have more conflicted feelings about this game than I do its predecessor. Modern Warfare 2 in isolation is just about perfect to me. Isolation, however, is a key word. My favorite part of stories in general is the conclusion. If I had to pick, I would pick the third book in a trilogy. The story is at its most intense, everything is culminating, and the stakes are the highest. I think I love Modern Warfare 2 so much because it feels like a conclusion. The pacing is so high octane, with the gas pedal all the way to the floor throughout. The stakes too are incredibly high, and it feels like the entire world is falling apart. Modern Warfare 2 is a masterclass in capturing visceral emotion, and I want to delve into the craftsmanship of the game. Above all, I guess, I want to show why I love this campaign so much. But I think Modern Warfare 2's intensity, while great on its own, makes a follow-up game incredibly hard to make. At the end, I'll reflect on that. With all that said, let's dive into Modern Warfare 2. Modern Warfare 2 opens with vignettes from the first game, which quickly summarize the story. These clips are paired with powerful music that does a great job of firmly placing us back in this world and its characters. The introduction ends with 3 words, ominously laid against a black backdrop. 5 years later. Next, we hear from General Shepard.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. Boundaries shift, new players step in, but power always finds a place to rest its head. We fought and bled alongside the Russians. We should have known they'd hate us for it. History is written by the victor, and here I am thinking we'd won. But you bring down one enemy and they find someone even worse to replace him. Locations change, the rationale, the objective. Yesterday's enemies are today's recruits. Train them to fight alongside you, and pray they don't eventually decide to hate you for it too.
Despite the 5-year time gap, it's evident that fallout from the first game's events are still being felt, another thing that the opening vignettes establish visually. Public opinion on Zakhaev has changed in Russia. The fringe ultranationalist is viewed as a hero now, and given his hostility and aggression, that doesn't bode well for the world stage. What I like even more about this cutscene though is that it's a great introduction to General Shepard. It reveals a cynical outlook on life, politics, and people. Loyalty is not an ideal that General Shepard values. Allies are only bound to each other by their shared interests, not any sense of loyalty. As soon as an ally's interests diverge, they will become your enemies. People are tools to be used for your own interests, and held at a distance, for they will surely betray you if given enough time and reason. The world too never really gets better or worse. Power simply moves from head to head. History always rewritten by the victor. Shepard's cynical outlook is already foreshadowing events near the end of the game. Attention switches from Russia to a ranger base in Afghanistan. Shepard tells Sergeant Foley that he's looking for something, but we as the audience aren't privy to what that thing is quite yet. The player steps into the shoes of Private First Class Joseph Allen. He gives a quick weapons demonstration and runs through a training course. Like the first game, Modern Warfare 2 will recommend a difficulty based on your performance, which is a detail I've always liked. Unlike the first game, I didn't botch my first attempt and got recommended Harden. Allen deploys on a mission. During the journey over, we hear another speech by Shepard. On the surface, it's your standard patriotic stuff about America being the most powerful military force. However, what's interesting is that it reinforces the same character traits in Shepard that were present in the introduction. It's evident here that despite Shepard's lip service to freedom, he still boils conflict down to power struggles. His words at the end, though, are the most revealing and the most unsettling on subsequent playthroughs.
This is a time for heroes, a time for legends. History is written by the victors. Let's get to work.
He states that it's a time for heroes and legends. Furthermore, he reiterates that history is written by the victors. Let's put it all together. Shepard doesn't value loyalty. The world is a sea of conflict, and he doesn't seem to put much moral value in anything aside from power. Winners get to write history, and history is a time of heroes and legends, a time for stories. It's implied that Shepard will do whatever it takes to win, and that once he's the victor, none of the atrocities beforehand matter, because he can write history to be whatever he wants it to be. He can make himself a hero even. This is a noxious combination of beliefs, and it's indicative that Shepard is prepared to do truly terrible things. Alan is deployed into combat, beginning the first proper mission in the game. The bridge combat team is trapped across the river. Alan and the other Rangers need to fight back OPFOR, the enemy faction, and take back the town they occupy. The most interesting part of this first mission for me is the distinct lack of context given for it. When playing this time around, I came to the realization that I never really knew what was going on during this mission. Even the details I just mentioned are scraped up by passing dialogue. I bet I'm not alone in that the details pass me by. Generally, you know who you're fighting, why you're fighting, and all that. Here, even the enemy is vague. OPFOR literally is short for opposing faction. However, I think this vagueness is deliberate. We're fighting under General Shepard, and this is a manifestation of his leadership style. General Shepard boils conflict down to power struggles, so that's all this mission really is to the soldiers on the ground too. A power struggle between us and our enemy. The rest of the context doesn't really matter. Furthermore, Shepard sees his men as tools, waiting to betray him. Of course he's going to operate things on a need-to-know basis. Why does Alan or any of the foot soldiers need to know anything more than who to point their rifles at? So I think this mission uses show don't tell in a really powerful and novel way here. After OPFOR is cleared out, Alan reports to General Shepard. The general is pleased with his performance. Alan is reassigned to Task Force 141, where he will now report directly to Shepard. Alan is honored, and he's excited to meet the rest of the team. That will have to wait though. 141 is currently recovering a downed ACS module behind enemy lines. The player takes the shoes of Gary Roach Sanderson, working under Captain Soap McTavish. Soap is a welcome sight for returning players. At the end of the first game he was injured, and it wasn't clear whether he would survive or not. Captain Price too is injured. He is nowhere to be found though. In his absence, Soap has assumed the rank of captain. It's a nice development for him. Roach and McTavish sneak behind enemy lines, taking out hostile soldiers with the help of silencers and heartbeat sensors. This stealth mission, set in this cold, stark environment, feels like the perfect introduction to Task Force 141. They are cold and lethal, just like the snowy wilderness. There are also some fun callbacks to the first game.
Roach, these Muppets have no idea we're here. Let's take this nice and slow.
This is a callback to my favorite line.
Right. What the hell kind of name is Soap, eh? How'd a Muppet like you pass selection?
Eventually, Roach and Captain McTavish are compromised, so they go guns loud. The mission becomes an explosive getaway sequence as the 141 operators fight through an army of opposition and board getaway snowmobiles. This segment for a lot of people is where Modern Warfare 2 jumps the shark. The first Modern Warfare wasn't realistic gameplay-wise, mind you, but there's a definite attempt to ground the story and atmosphere. That contrasts starkly with this section, where you're unloading a Glock one-handed as you pilot a snowmobile down the side of a mountain. You couldn't imagine a segment like this being in the first game. With that said, I do think this mission works well for the story. Task Force 141 seems invincible here, and the tone does feel like an action movie. Two men manage to take down an entire base by their lonesome. They're successful in their mission too, recovering the module. This all contrasts greatly with the next mission, and it makes this next mission's strategy and horrors even more punchy. This mission is the most known in Modern Warfare 2, and it's one of the most infamous in video game history. That mission is No Russian. Perspective returns to Alan. Shepard orders him to go deep undercover with the CIA. He is to get close to a guy named Makarov, a brutal man who fights for no country but only his own interests, dealing in blood and torture. He has no boundaries to speak of, which we will witness very shortly. Shepard says that getting close to Makarov will cost Alan a piece of himself, but that it's nothing compared to what will save. As is becoming pattern with Shepard, the mission is vague. Why exactly does Alan have to get close to Makarov? What will Alan save? There are no answers. The mission begins with Makarov's chilling and iconic line.
Remember, no Russian.
The mission becomes frighteningly clear. Makarov is conducting a terrorist attack on the airport. We as Alan have to be part of it. Shepard was understating the cost. This mission will cost more to Alan than just one part of himself. It will cost his entire soul. Makarov's men make their way through the airport, mercilessly gunning down civilians. It's a ghastly sight. As Alan, you don't have to fire personally, but you have to carry on with these men and watch. I don't think I have to explain why this mission was incredibly controversial, even making it on national news for being so violent. I want to keep the focus of this video on the game itself, so I'm not really going to dive into the controversy. I'm sure there are countless videos just on No Russian if you want to learn more about it. For this video, I'm interested in if this mission is effective from a storytelling and narrative point of view. In terms of drawing emotion out of the player, this mission is certainly effective. To be honest, I don't enjoy playing it. It's just unsettling and gives me a slimy feeling, which is exactly what it's trying to do. The contrast between this mission and the rest of the game is part of what makes it so effective, but because of the contrast, it also feels out of place. Let's look at another one of my favorite games as an example, Spec Ops: The Line. I have an entire video on that game if you're interested. I won't spoil story events, but a lot of horrific things happen. However, the difference is nearly the entire game has that tone, and it's focused on the horrors of war. A visceral, unsettling scene like this would mesh seamlessly with the rest of the game. Modern Warfare 2, in contrast, doesn't have the same grittiness or dedication to depicting the brutality of violence. As a result, No Russian burns itself into your brain. The suffering of the civilians is rendered with such attention to detail. People literally are dragging their fallen friends and family. They limp away with wounds and so on. If you ask most players about the campaign of Modern Warfare 2, I'd wager that the first thing most will bring up is No Russian. This mission almost overshadows the rest of the game because of how jarring the tonal shift is, and I'm not sure that's a great thing. Even the developers knew it was a departure from the rest of the game, evidenced by the fact that you are giving a warning about this mission when you start the campaign, and you can just outright skip it. I could go on analyzing whether or not No Russian is too jarring of a tonal shift for the game, but at that point, No Russian would be overshadowing the rest of this video, which would be a bit ironic, and I don't want that. So, No Russian punches hard emotionally. What else does it accomplish narratively? This mission does a great job of establishing Makarov as a villain. This mission instills a very strong hatred of him, as you watch him mow down civilians with abandon. Shepard's description of him as a man that has no boundaries is accurate. He has no sense of hesitation or any signs of remorse for his actions either. Yet at the same time, he's not depicted as an unhinged maniac either.
They're right on time. Check your weapons and ammo. We've waited a long time for this. Haven't we all?
His actions are calculated, blisteringly so. You see hints of this in the beginning, when he stresses the importance of his men not speaking Russian, but you see it even more at the mission's conclusion.
We've sent a strong message with this attack, Makarov. That was no message. This is a message.
The Americans thought he could deceive us. When they find out why, all of Russia will cry for war.
This massacre wasn't just an indiscriminate act of terror. Makarov executed the attack knowing that Alan was an American mole. If Alan's body was found, the Russians would blame America. The beginning cutscene established that ultranationalists have gained power in the country. It's a powder keg, just waiting for ignition. Alan is the spark to ignite the world ablaze. Alan's death is also the final gut punch of tragedy, and it makes this mission even more resonant. You can't help but mourn for him. This guy is a patriot who just wanted to serve his country, so much so that he's willing to delve into the darkest depths and be part of a sickening tragedy that will scar his soul beyond repair. And for all that sacrifice, his mission ends in failure. Catastrophic failure. His death precipitates chaos that will amass even more death than this airport attack. There's just an irony and sadness to that which I find really powerful. By the end of this mission, you hate Makarov and you want to get him. In that way, the player's motivation syncs up really well with Task Force 141's goals. Although Makarov probably gets as much screen time as Zakhaev got in the first Modern Warfare, I had a lot more feeling towards Makarov than Zakhaev. And that's a sign to me that Modern Warfare 2 did a great job setting up its villain. Despite Shepard's miscalculation, he and his team continue moving forward. To prevent war, they need proof that Makarov was the one behind the op, not the US forces. They track down Alejandro Rojas, or Alex the Red, in Brazil by analyzing the bullet casings from the attack. He is the one who supplied Makarov. Task Force 141 heads out to get him. They find his right-hand man, who catches wind of their attack. After a brief little chase, they capture him, and Soap and Ghost promptly begin interrogation on him. Modern Warfare 2 is delving into more morally gray territory than the first game. In the first game, Price did interrogate Al-Assad, but it wasn't quite to the same level as rigging him with shock collars. This is paired with Alan's deep op, which was very clearly morally gray at the minimum. This moral grayness continues throughout the level. As Roach and his allies hunt through the favelas, panicked civilians dart into your view, and it takes a disciplined trigger finger to not shoot them. It creates a sense of unease, a sense of hesitation whenever you're about to pull the trigger, which emphasizes the general lack of clarity we feel. This is emphasized further by the level design. Enemies shoot at you from nearly every direction, high and low, and it's disorienting. Eventually, 141 catches up to the arms dealer and Soap captures him. Things finally are looking up. Then the next mission begins. An ominous cutscene plays between NORAD and an Air Force base. They're getting phantom sightings on the west coast, unsure if there really are enemy soldiers or not. They don't learn until it's too late that the Russians are actually attacking from the east. The ACS module that 141 retrieved during Cliffhanger, well, it looks like the Russians still managed to crack it, and this let them bypass the US's defensive grid undetected. Now the US is scrambling to defend herself as an invasion begins in full force. Here begins the mission Wolverines. The player assumes control of Private James Ramirez under the command of Sergeant Foley. The mission begins with Ramirez traveling through a sleepy American suburb. The sky, though, is gray and glowing, signaling a world that is about to burst into flames. A swarm of paratroopers blot the sky, along with their planes flying overhead. When Ramirez steps out on foot, the paratroopers only seem to increase. Surface-to-air fire explodes in the sky. Ramirez is joined by only a handful of other Rangers. They run in front of you, framing their small numbers against the paratroopers. Through this imagery, the game communicates the situation very clearly. You're unprepared and outnumbered. The beautiful score swells in the background, complementing this imagery perfectly. I'm going into such detail about this because I think that Wolverine sets this melancholy, desperate mood perfectly. Already there's a despair that's just palpable. The mood being created here is why this mission, the subsequent Ranger missions, are my favorites out of pretty much all first-person shooters. The Rangers fight through Russian forces, ending up in a small center with fast food restaurants and gas stations. They have to defend these objectives against incoming enemies. These in-game objectives are apt. Fighting a defensive battle and trying to hold your ground against the incoming horde helps sell the larger state of the conflict. The fact that the Rangers are fighting to defend gas stations and restaurants too underscores just how unprepared they were for this fight. Although the setting is pedestrian, there's a high-value target here, codenamed Raptor, and the Rangers retrieve him from a fallen helicopter. The Rangers are successful in their mission, but as they head to vehicles for exfil, an even larger force of paratroopers fall from the sky. Past them, the sky is burning even more intensely than before. The desperation becomes even more intense. Perspective returns to Task Force 141. All they got out of the arms dealer is that Makarov hates someone even more than the Americans, and this guy is locked up in a gulag in Russia. This is the only lead 141 has. They hope to use this prisoner as bait to lure Makarov into the open. There's bad news though. The local militia is closing in on them, and they have to escape. Nikolai readies the chopper for them. Nikolai was a Russian informant in the first game, so it's cool seeing him return in the second game to help Soap once more. Nikolai is pushed further and further out by the militia. It comes down to a desperate chase, with Roach having to die for the helicopter. They barely make it out. Perspective switches back to our Rangers in the US. Shepard commandeers Sergeant Foley's unit and gives them a new assignment. The Russians are burning through their defenses and intel, and while the Rangers are going to stop them, they deploy with the Honey Badger to take out enemy anti-air systems. The Rangers fight inch by inch through suburbia, now inundated with bullet fire and explosions. The enemy opposition is intense, which feels even more intense due to the close quarters nature of fighting. This sky is even more yellow and red than the prior Ranger mission. The fires once at the horizon seem to be consuming the entire sky now. The use of color here does a good job of highlighting the overall conflict. The world is on fire, and that flame is only growing. The atmosphere here is amazing too, almost verging on the post-apocalyptic. Enemy choppers overwhelm the sky. A burning plane too leaves a trail of smoke as it plummets to the earth. We'll see this plane again in a moment. Yet at the same time, the player feels more powerful here. You have the power of the Honey Badger at your disposal. With the click of a button, you can laze targets, which the Honey Badger will take out with prejudice. The enemy's power is growing, but so is yours. The increase on both sides meshes well with the rising action stage of the plot. Foley's unit takes out the AAAs, freeing the skies, but they don't get the chance to rest. Shepard gives them a new mission. They're to retrieve a high-value target from a panic room. They approach the house. The plane we saw before had crashed in front of it. I like this detail, and it's something I hadn't noticed before. Unfortunately, when they get to the panic room, they find the HVT already dead. Foley reports back to Shepard. With that, we leave the Rangers for now and return to Task Force 141. They want to get to the mystery man in the Gulag that Makarov hates, but they can't do it quite yet. The Russians have set up SAM air defenses on oil rigs. Oil workers are being used as human shields, so these rigs can't be blown up outright. Task Force 141 is to clear out the rig to create a pathway to reach the Gulag. I will say, given Shepard's willingness to sacrifice civilians for the CIA op, not to mention his later actions in the game, his reluctance to kill civilians initially struck me as a bit contrived, but after giving it some more thought, I actually think it makes sense. Shepard cares about being perceived as a hero, so even if he doesn't personally care about saving the civilians, I think he cares about wanting to look like the guy who does, if that makes sense. 141 infiltrates the rig in a cool segment before sneaking about the rig and freeing civilians. I do love the color palette of this mission. The blues and whites are a great visual break from the apocalyptic yellows and reds. Modern Warfare 2 has a great visual pacing, and it swaps between color schemes right when one setting starts feeling a bit samey. It gives the game a visual punch that still holds up today. The slower, more deliberate gameplay of this mission, at least at the beginning, is also a welcome reprieve from the intense fighting during the Ranger missions. Even when the action ramps up, this mission has fresh ideas like having to fight through a smoke screen with the aid of thermal optics. Overall, while the pacing of Modern Warfare 2 is certainly faster than the first game, I still do think there is attention paid to making the game feel varied and dynamic. Once the oil rig is cleared, 141 is clear to set off to the Gulag. During the debrief, Captain McTavish gives a short history of the building.
It started out as a castle with an actual dungeon, built to withstand any siege. The building survived every brutal winter. The occupants, they weren't so lucky. The monastery didn't survive the purges. Over the last century, it's played host to anyone the government didn't want but couldn't kill. The place is filled with living casualties of the last war, which I swear I thought we'd won. But I suppose it's all a day at the races. You back the losing horse and this is where you end up. 627's the piece of meat Makarov wants, so let's cut him loose.
This debrief is great. It sets the setting really well, and it gets the player amped up to storm the place. Call of Duty games in general don't usually have a ton of setting building, since the locations are based on real life most of the time, so this aspect is cool to see. The Gulag mission begins, and it's great. I was going to say it was one of my favorites in the game, but I find myself wanting to say that about like half the missions in the game. It goes to show why it's top tier for me. The Gulag is an incredibly varied mission. You start off providing sniper overwatch from a helicopter before storming the exterior. From there, 141 descends into the prison. There's a cool segment in the center of the Panopticon where you use a riot shield and brace against an onslaught of foes. This is followed by a night vision segment where you skulk through shadows like a predator. Then there's an intense opposition in the shower where 141 has to fight tooth and nail through riot shield guards, while their buddies shoot at you from above. You have to watch all angles and be very strategic. All this is to say, there's an incredible variety to the Gulag, and it's an edge-of-your-seat roller coaster in the best way. It really showcases the highs that a cinematic campaign can reach. This is all punctuated by the big reveal at the end. The prisoner you're after is none other than Captain Price himself, our fearless leader from the prior game. He's the primary man responsible for taking out ultranationalists like Zakhaev and his allies like al-Assad. It's not difficult to see why Makarov hates him so much. They need to get out of the gulag and fast. The building's coming down around them. A frenetic sequence ensues, where 141 tries to get to an escape chopper. They're finally pulled up through a route created by a dropped bomb, which ended up being a dud. The mission comes to an explosive end, with the gulag going up in flames behind them. Any excitement is dulled quickly by the start of the next mission. The debrief is just an emergency broadcast message, which drones with an unsettling alarm. I find this really eerie, and it sends a chill up my spine. Maybe that's because I've heard broadcasts like this in real life for tornado warnings, but it definitely had an impact on me either way. It sets the stage perfectly for the mission. The player takes the shoes of Ramirez once more. He's in an underground evac center, one appearing in disarray and hastily put together. Rangers are wounded, and they're just littered about. There isn't anyone to help them, it seems. Explosions roar from above, and each rumble shakes the center. From all this, it's clear that the Rangers are not in great shape, and this dour mood is punctuated perfectly by the mournful soundtrack. A mood of desperation and despair are perfectly set. Despite being down, the Rangers aren't out. They head to the surface to buy time for the evac effort. The Hoover building awaits. The imagery here is powerful. Once more, the sky is even more intense than before, now actually glowing like a fire. And there's just something too about weaving through bunkers, slipping past razor wires, with your enemies shooting down on you from atop one of your own nation's cherished buildings. I guess it just really underscores the dire state of this fight. You were caught unprepared for the battle. Now you have to do everything you can to take back what was stolen from you. They fight through opposition in the building. The close quarters nature of the fighting is intense, but it also makes the fighting feel more personal. The Rangers reach the enemy's crow's nest, where the player gets a good view of the battle. I know I've been going on and on about the visuals in the sky, but the wrecked monument here, getting rocketed by enemy ordnance, with a bloody sky and the cratered earth, is great visually. Call of Duty games have gotten the rap of being overly gray and brown, but I really do think Modern Warfare 2 uses color masterfully. Ramirez assists the best he can by sniping enemies and taking down helicopters. Having bought the evac site time, they race to the rooftop, as they're in danger of being overrun. An intense race against the clock follows. They board a helicopter with Ramirez taking the minigun. Ramirez deals damage to the enemy, causing a bunch of explosions. There's a sense of triumph as it feels like the tide is finally turning against the enemy. But this feeling is fleeting. Their chopper is hit by a rocket and it crash lands. Ramirez comes to. His fellow Rangers are desperately holding out against encroaching enemies. They're low on ammo. Ramirez only has one magazine left, but the enemies are endless. Things aren't looking good. The mission abruptly ends on this note that seems utterly hopeless. It's a great cliffhanger. Speaking of cliffhangers, I'm going to take a very brief pause to plug my science fiction series, The Northfield Saga. If you like high intensity action and high emotional stakes, please consider checking out my series. I think you'll really enjoy it. The third book in the series actually just took first place in another book festival, winning the Best General Fiction Award in the Southwest Book Festival. That makes it the second book festival win after the New England Book Festival in December last year. It also got an honorable mention in the same category in the Northwest Book Festival. So if you're interested, I hope that's a good testament to the quality I think it has. A link is in the description. I appreciate the support from everyone. Perspective returns to Task Force 141. Shepard gives Price a debrief on the situation. Very quickly, the men butt heads on what to do next. Price wants to end the war with a brutal, decisive action, while Shepard thinks the focus should be on finding Makarov. The Rangers' struggle is great for contextualizing Task Force 141's mission. Having experienced the war firsthand, you know very well the stakes if 141 fails. It gives you a bigger investment in their mission than you would otherwise have, and you feel the sense of urgency. Because of the state that the Rangers are in, I think the player is naturally inclined to side with Price here. Given where we left off with Ramirez, you understand the damage if this war continues on any longer. The men can't come to an agreement, so Price takes matters into his own hands and disobeys Shepard.
You've been in the gulag too long, Price. Focus on taking out Makarov.
No time, sir. We need to end this war today.
I'm not asking you, Price. This is an order. You're to...
Looks like we lost our connection.
He's the only one so far who has given Shepard any questioning or pushback. He's always had a good read on people, and that shows here. They sneak through the snowy forest on their way to the nuclear sub. Once more, the slower and more deliberate mission is a great break from the war stateside. Pretty soon their cover is blown, and they fight tooth and nail through hordes of troops. They are aided by the Predator missile, which adds a nice change up to gameplay and tips the odds back in our favor. They reach the sub. Ghost panics because the nuclear silo doors open.
Guys, do you copy? The silo doors are open! I repeat, the silo doors are open!
Good.
Missile in the air! Missile in the air!
This is what Price wanted though. He wanted to launch the nuke. Shepard appears vindicated. Captain Price really does seem off his rocker. Shepard discusses the rocket's travel path with the Secretary of Defense. The rockets seem poised to hit the East Coast, and tens of thousands of casualties are expected. On that pleasant note, perspective once again switches back to Ramirez, who's still stuck in the helicopter. The moment's replay of him fighting with his last magazine against endless enemy forces. All seems truly lost now. But then perspective is pulled all the way back into orbit. From the perspective of an astronaut on the International Space Station, we see Price's warhead curve around the Earth's surface. Then, detonation. The poor astronaut comes crashing down to the Earth with the station destroyed. Here at the darkest moment, Price's intention finally comes into light. The nuke being detonated in the atmosphere triggers an electromagnetic pulse, EMP for short, which destroys all electronics. This may seem far-fetched, but it's actually scientifically accurate. This EMP discombobulates the Russians, sending their aircraft crashing down. The Rangers don't know what's going on, but they do know to run. The EMP buys the Rangers enough time to escape narrowly, barely avoiding the plummeting aircraft. Once they regroup, they venture out into the darkness. Their comms are down, so they have no way to communicate. Even their weapon optics are disabled. This mission feels truly post-apocalyptic, as the Rangers make their way through the wreckage, cut off from command, with everything being eerily silent. They come across a Ranger who's serving as a runner to deliver messages, although he's too disoriented to even remember the passcode.
Star! Or we will fire on you! I don't remember the damn countersign, alright? I'm just a runner. Don't shoot!
The proper response is Texas, soldier. What do you got?
Colonel Marshall's assembling a task force at Whiskey Hotel. You guys need to keep heading north. So where are you going then? Tell everyone else.
The runner tells them to meet at Whiskey Hotel. Soon the Rangers run into opposition. The Russians are in smaller packs now, and they're not the organized onslaught that they were earlier, as they're similarly cut off from command. Price's goal of disrupting and thereby slowing down the war seems to have been a success. It's cool to see 141's actions directly impact the Rangers on the ground, as it once again adds a further gravity to their mission. A rainstorm starts, which adds to the dour mood, the darkness, and the sense of chaos and disorientation. Thunder and lightning reign in the dark sky. This and the following mission, which is really just one big two-parter, has my favorite atmosphere in the game. With how much I've gone on about the atmosphere, it's saying something. They reach Whiskey Hotel, and so begins a desperate fight for the White House. This mission evokes similar feelings as taking the Hoover Building, with us fighting to take back a building of even greater importance. Bunny hopping between craters as enemies fire mercilessly from above. The darkness and the rain create an even more somber and oppressive atmosphere than last time. The Rangers manage to take back the White House, and they deploy signal flares to alert US jets that they're friendly. Signal flares also emanate from nearby rooftops, signifying that the US forces are making progress in taking back the capital. I think that the end of this mission is an overall declaration that Price's gambit was a success. but the halt of the Russian advance long enough for the US to rally. With this victory, Shepard sets his sights back on capturing Makarov, if his sights ever left Makarov. He's always been pretty fixated on Makarov, now hasn't he? His right history line also reinforces what I was talking about earlier. Shepard is a firm believer in history being written by the victor, so being the victor is all that matters. There are two potential safe havens that Makarov could be at. The first is a boneyard in the Caucasus Mountains, and the second is an estate in Afghanistan. 141 breaks up, with Price and Soap heading to the boneyard, and Ghost heading to the estate with Roach. First up is the estate, and a mission titled Loose Ends. The mission starts off like it's going to be another stealth mission, but that expectation blows up when you stumble across a minefield. Then it's a full-blown intense fight to the estate. When they get there, they breach rooms in an effort to find Makarov. Their elusive target isn't anywhere to be found, but the mission isn't for nothing. The estate is a gold mine for intel, so 141 downloads everything it can while holding off against reinforcements. This defensive segment is intense, and is further intensified by an unreliable download speed, which is a nice touch. The download speed varies from really fast to really slow, so you have no idea how long this defensive segment is actually going to go. It adds a sense of anxiety to the mission. Once the files are downloaded, Ghost and Roach make for an exit. They get there by the skin of their teeth, and all looks to be well as Shepard himself ushers them onto the chopper. Shepard then betrays them.
That's one less loose end.
This is one of the most memorable parts of the games, and it's burned into the player's head. When you ask people what the most memorable part of the game is, if they don't say no Russian, I almost guarantee they'll say this part instead. There are a few reasons why I think it's so memorable. First off, unless you've been paying really close attention and picking apart the dialogue like I did for this video, the betrayal seems to come from completely out of left field. Most players are caught completely by surprise. The next reason is that Shepard is just so disrespectful during this betrayal. He shows no signs of remorse or mourning for killing two of his own men. He kills them in just about the worst way possible too. He could have ended it quickly with bullets in the heads. Instead he burns Roach and Ghost alive, watching with apathy as gasoline is poured over them. Price figured out the betrayal, but too late. You hear his desperate pleading voice as Shepard lords over them. He flicks his cigar onto Roach and Ghost, and he walks away without hesitation as they're engulfed in flames. The sheer cruelty of this betrayal is very effective in a narrative sense. It motivates the player, pushing them through the rest of the game. As the player, you want vengeance for their deaths, and payback for the disrespect. So why did Shepard betray everyone? Well, it's not explicitly laid out, so it's up to a bit of interpretation. I'll get back to it later. Price and McTavish are in the boneyard. A three-way conflict has started between them, Makarov's men, and General Shepard's Shadow Company. Shepard is hoping to wipe them all out in one fell swoop, thereby burying the truth. His version of history can then be told without anyone knowing the wiser. I figure Shadow Company fired upon Price and McTavish right when Shepard shot Roach, which is how Price determined Shepard wasn't to be trusted. Soap and Price have to weave their way between the enemy factions who are busy fighting each other. Nikolai waits for extraction on the other side of the boneyard. A really interesting moment occurs where Price contacts Makarov himself. He asks Makarov to give him Shepard's location.
No, you can hear me on this channel, Makarov. You and I both know you won't last a week.
And neither will you.
Makarov, you ever hear the old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend?
Price, one day you're going to find that cuts both ways. Shepard is using Site Hotel Bravo. You know where it is. I'll see you there.
Looking forward to it. Give my regards to Zakhaev if you get there first.
Price's primary objective has changed. Makarov can come later. Shepard comes first. Price's willingness to team up with Makarov highlights Shepard's attitude during the game's introduction. Yesterday's enemies are today's recruits. The parallels drawn between the two men, and more of these parallels will show up. Price and McTavish's escape reaches an explosive finale, where they have to drive a truck onto a plane, which is blistering across the runway. While Price and McTavish gear up to get Shepard, they reckon with the sheer scale of the force opposing them. I love Price's dialogue. It's epic and it really gets you into the mindset to take on Shepard. However, it also highlights another parallel between Shepard and Price. Price remarks about being remembered for their actions.
They will remember us for this, because out of all our vast array of nightmares, this is the one we choose for ourselves. We go forward like a breath exhaled from the earth, with vigor in our hearts and one goal in sight. We will kill him.
This reflects Shepard's own desire to be remembered as something grand, as something great. They sneak to Makarov's location. His intel was solid. Shepard appears to be camped out here. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, this is another mission that I loved. Price and McTavish infiltrate the Shadow Company HQ, prey turned predators. When their enemies catch wind, it's a fierce fight, taking down elite soldiers with laser-mounted rifles and others equipped with riot shields. They reach the command center of the HQ only to discover that it's rigged to blow. Shepard once again demonstrates his sheer disregard for his men's lives, with a single throwaway line to their service being honored.
I'm executing Directive 116 Bravo. If you're still inside, your service will be honored. Shepard out.
The remnants of 141 narrowly escape, and they continue chasing Shepard. The final mission endgame begins.
This is for the record. History is written by the victor. History is filled with liars. If he lives and we die, his truth becomes written and ours is lost. Shepard will be a hero, because all you need to change the world is one good lie and a river of blood. He's about to complete the greatest trick a liar ever played on history. His truth will be the truth, but only if he lives and we die.
During the introduction cutscene, Price highlights the stakes of the mission. This is the most striking parallel between Price and Shepard. Price doesn't deny Shepard's assessment of history. In fact, he wholeheartedly agrees with it. History is written by the victors through and through. These parallels illustrate that Price and Shepard actually have a very similar outlook on the world. However, the two men remain diametrically opposed. Why is that? Well, it all comes down to motives. Shepard acts entirely out of self-interest. He fans the flames of war for his own legacy. Price engages in behavior that at times can be just as morally bleak, but his interests are always in the service of others. He launched the nuke, not for his own sake, but to slow down the war. He teamed up with Makarov even, not for his own sake, but to stop Shepard. The similarities and differences here between hero and villain are what make their dynamics so interesting. Soap and Price engage in one final chase of their quarry. This is suitably climactic, with the high intensity and thrills you'd expect. They plunge into a waterfall, leaving McTavish disoriented. He stumbles across the shoreline and finds Shepard. The general gets the better of him and he stabs McTavish in the chest. Shepard stands over him and prepares to kill him. At this point he reflects.
5 years ago, I lost 30,000 men in the blink of an eye. And the world just fucking watched. Tomorrow, there will be no shortage of volunteers, no shortage of patriots.
This sheds more light into why Shepard betrayed 141. It's a cover-up, that much is clear. Shepard wants to rewrite history, and he wants to be seen as a hero, a legend even. But what's it a cover-up for exactly? It could merely be to cover up his assignment of Alan to Makarov. The whole terrorist incident that kicked off the war being directly tied to Shepard would definitely be a boo-boo that he would want covered up. It kinda ruins his whole image after all. But there's another theory out there, and it's that Shepard actually leaked Alan's true identity to Makarov on purpose. I think this theory tracks, especially given this cutscene. Shepard wanted this war to happen. He's angry that the US didn't retaliate after the nuclear bomb from the first game. There is no revenge and no retaliation for the casualties. Secondly, Shepard waited to betray 141 until he had his hands on Makarov's information. Why would he do that? Since Alan was a part of 141, it's pretty likely that 141 already knew that Shepard had a hand in planting him. What difference would Makarov's intel make? Well, the evidence could point to Shepard leaking the information. It's not confirmed, not from what I've seen anyway, but it's the explanation that makes the most sense to me. As I mentioned earlier, his motives are up to interpretation. Whether or not you like that or find it frustrating, I could see either way. I mean, I found that theory thanks to Reddit. I didn't come to it all by myself. In the nick of time, Price comes to the rescue. Shepard and Price brawl, with Price on the losing end. MacTavish takes matters into his own hands, pulling a knife out of his own chest and hurling it at Shepard. He's accomplished the mission, but at what cost? Price looks dead in front of him. Then Price stirs. He comes to Soap's aid, and with Nikolai's help, Soap is airlifted from the battle. This is reflective of Modern Warfare's ending, where Soap was similarly injured and airlifted from the bridge. With that, Modern Warfare 2 ends on uncertain terms. The war doesn't appear to have ended, and Makarov is still out there somewhere. So let's bring all this together. I think that Modern Warfare 2 is a masterpiece. Its talent especially lies in drawing visceral emotions out of the player. The player swings from triumphant to hopeless, from horrified to enraged, from trusting to betrayed, rapidly. It makes the game a ride to play in the purest form of the term, with players bounding from emotional peak to valley to peak again. These emotions too are all cranked up to 10. It's the worst betrayal you can imagine. It's the worst horrors you can imagine. The excitement is at its maximum, with crazy set pieces like snowmobile shootouts and airlifting out of an explosive gulag. Modern Warfare 2 rides the edge of intensity. For some people, it pushes too hard and starts to veer on the edge of absurdity, jumping the shark in other words. For me though, it rides that line perfectly. Pretty much everything the game does works for me, which is why it's one of my favorite campaigns of all time, bumping shoulders for the top spot. However, it's not a game in isolation. Modern Warfare 2 is the second game in a trilogy. Clearly there's still story left, with Makarov running loose and the war still ongoing. Modern Warfare 2 upped the stakes from Modern Warfare. The third entry in a trilogy, being the conclusion, is supposed to up the stakes even higher. Here, I think, is where the complications arise. Modern Warfare 2 cranked the set pieces as high as they could go, without diving into the absurd. But trying to crank that notch any further will tip over the edge. Modern Warfare 2 mined that visceral emotion out of the player. And there's tonally little place Modern Warfare can reach that its predecessor didn't. Modern Warfare 2 created a very difficult path for Modern Warfare 3 to walk. How can a game increase scale without feeling overly contrived or absurd? All that remains now, I suppose, is to see whether Modern Warfare 3 managed to achieve this monumental feat. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 had an impossible job. Its predecessor, Modern Warfare 2, cranked every emotional notch up to 10. Modern Warfare 3 had to follow that game up. The conclusion of a trilogy is expected to ramp up the stakes even higher. This is the hardest game of the trilogy for me to critique. The reason why is because individually, Modern Warfare 3's missions are masterfully crafted. In fact, I think you could make an argument that Modern Warfare 3 has the strongest mission set in the series. However, each mission doesn't exist in isolation. Each one serves as part of a cohesive whole, and it's when taking a step back and looking at the whole of the game where the cracks start to show. Modern Warfare 3 is a brilliant game, but it can't escape this sense of excess. There's a lack of restraint here that Modern Warfare 1 and even Modern Warfare 2 had, which makes certain parts of Modern Warfare 3 feel less impactful. You can feel the developers struggle with a goal that very well may have been impossible. So we're going to dive into Modern Warfare 3. We're going to look at both the good and the bad, Modern Warfare 3's triumphs and also its downfalls. With that, let's get into it. Modern Warfare 3 starts off strong. It picks up immediately where its predecessor left off. General Shepard is dead, but the world he lit on fire still burns. Soap is gravely wounded, bleeding out from a knife wound in his chest. Captain Price and Nikolai frantically wheel him to a safe house for medical attention. Meanwhile, Soap's life flashes before his eyes as he slips in and out of delirium from the blood loss. These flashbacks recap the most pivotal parts of the prior games: the death of Zakhaev, the pursuit of Shepard, and Soap's injury. I think this scene is brilliant. It manages to recap the player while remaining high tension and also exciting. The scene ends with Soap's life still hanging by a thread, us as the audience unsure of whether he'll pull through. A cliffhanger right from the start. It sets a high frenetic pace of the game well. We travel halfway across the world to New York City, where the World War is continuing apace. The fight isn't going well. The Russians have jamming rigs in the city, killing US air support and making it a losing battle. Delta Force is summoned to rectify the situation. The player takes the Shoes of Frost, and his team is tasked with taking out the primary jammer, located on the Stock Exchange building. The debrief is quick, underscoring the urgency of the situation. When the mission begins, Frost finds himself in a crash-burning vehicle. This introduction too is a statement. It reinforces how we don't have the upper hand here. This battle is being lost, and we have to scrape victory back by our fingernails. When Frost exits the vehicle, he immediately finds himself under fire. Modern Warfare 3's first gameplay level starts off differently than the other two games. Both Modern Warfare 1 and 2 opened with a tutorial level, where the player ran through a training course. The player could play through it at their own leisure, even able to run through it multiple times to get a faster time. There's no such slow start with Modern Warfare 3. It's pedal to the metal right away. This level is great, one of my favorites, although you're going to hear me say that a lot in this video. Modern Warfare 3, as I said, has some of the strongest mission design in the trilogy. This level establishes the stakes of the war. Traveling through the streets in New York, the player witnesses the widespread destruction of the city. Ruined buildings, destroyed streets, fire and smoke abound. It sells the scale and destruction of this conflict. Delta Force gets to the roof of the Stock Exchange. Hostiles fire on them from other rooftops, and Frost makes use of Predator drones to take them out. Once the jammer is destroyed, Delta Force boards a Black Hawk for exfil. Enemy Hinds give chase, and Delta Force plays a deadly game of tag with the enemy choppers. It's an explosive finale to the level, and the Black Hawk even threatens to go down in the end. In isolation, it's a great end to the level, capitalizing on the build-up of the conflict, and once more communicating the higher stakes and pace of the third game. The in isolation part is important though. Keep this climax in mind because I'll be referencing it later. With the jammer down, US forces are able to regain air dominance in the city. The Russians still present a threat from the sea, however, so the US goes on the offensive before their enemies can counterattack. They infiltrate the command vessel and turn its weapon systems on its own fleet.
Get up, boys. Where's our infill point? Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. I thought it collapsed. It did.
This is such a cool line. I feel like it really hypes you up for the mission. Delta Force infiltrates through the flooded tunnel. It's a moment of quiet reflection as the player witnesses the rows of vehicles, which serve as the poor occupants' tombs. It's another display of the cost this war has wrought. They plant explosives, forcing the sub to surface. Delta Force boards, and the city is beside you, in smoke and flames and wreckage, and it's another reminder of the war's destruction. Delta Force fights through the sub, a claustrophobic set of battles which is a good gameplay change of pace from the city action. Delta launches the missiles and boards the boats to exfil. Another high-intensity escape follows, with a constant stream of explosions, just like the last mission. In isolation, the end of the submission is fun and climactic, capitalizing on the buildup of excitement from the quiet start. But it's two pretty intense, explosive endings back to back. You're going to see this pattern continue. With another success, the US puts the Russians on the back foot, and they retreat. Attention returns to Captain Price and Soap. Soap is still on the mend, but Price is confident that he'll pull through. They have problems though. Makarov, Modern Warfare 2's other antagonist, is trying to tie up loose ends. His men are converging on Price and his allies to kill them. Nikolai summons his best man to help, Yuri. We're given scarce information on him, only really learning that he's ex-Spetsnaz and he hates Makarov. This mysterious Yuri is our POV character. As soon as we take his shoes, Makarov's men attack. Yuri has to defend against the onslaught. The fight takes place in the Himalayas, which is a breathtaking vista. Despite the color inherent in this location, the color scheme is very brown and gray. Modern Warfare 3 mutes its color palette compared to its predecessors, and I think it's the game where criticism of Call of Duty being too brown and gray has merit. Yuri fights through the streets, helping to escort Soap to safety. This mission captures the feeling of being hunted really well, with the barrage of enemies feeling constant. The odds tip back in Task Force 141's favor when they get a hold of an unmanned ground vehicle. Yuri is the pilot, and he dispatches enemies in their way. He downs helicopter after helicopter. Soap makes it to an escape chopper, but the ground vehicle is downed. Yuri has to escape on his own. What follows is one of the most insane segments of the game, where Yuri slides down the side of a mountain as buildings explode and collapse around him. There have been 3 missions in the game so far, and all 3 have ended with an explosive escape sequence. They really start to feel samey and monotone, and their effectiveness is diminished. In the next mission, we take the shoes of a new man, a bodyguard for the Russian president. They're in an airplane, and the president is heading to a meeting with his men, presumably his inner trusted circle. He kisses his daughter farewell, and then he discusses brokering peace with the West. He knows the continued war will lead to mutual destruction, and he sees no benefit in it. In fact, they are heading to a peace summit. Then things go topsy-turvy, literally. Ultranationalists attack the plane, and the player has to protect the president and his daughter. It's one of the coolest segments in the game, as the plane periodically enters freefall, resulting in zero-gravity battles. The close quarters fighting is intense, and the freneticness of it all really sells the desperation. Unfortunately, I think the effectiveness is a bit undercut by the overuse of big explosive set pieces up until this point. Watching the aircraft split in half in a fiery, hellish nightmare left me feeling a bit numb, which definitely isn't the emotion I should be feeling at this point. Our agent survives and tries to protect the president. Ultimately, though, he fails. Makarov himself steps out of the chopper and takes the Russian president hostage. The peace summit with the West obviously cannot happen now, and hopes of a treaty go up in smoke. The war rages on. It's a reinforcement that the Russian nation is not the true enemy of this fight. It's Makarov who's pulling all the strings, who's putting all this violence into motion. It's a reminder of the importance of stopping him. Makarov wants the nuclear codes, but the president isn't willing to give them up. The president's daughter, who we saw before, is out there somewhere. She's the key to breaking him. Price and his men recognize the need to stop Makarov. They start their search in Africa, where Makarov has been using a local paramilitary group for shipments. His sights are set on Britain in particular, and they don't know what he's trying to move. Price and the disavowed 141 deploy to find out. The level starts off slowly with a stealth sequence, which is a very welcome change of pace. The mission ends with 141 failing, and Makarov getting away with the cargo. This is also a nice change of pace, as it's not super common to see 141 just outright fail at their mission. Well, we know that Makarov's targeting London, so now we find out the hard way of what he's been up to. MI6 gets word that a mysterious shipment is arriving on their soil, with unknown hostiles expecting the package. The SAS is deployed to take care of the threat. This is another one of my favorite missions in the whole game, in fact the whole series. I just love the dark, rainy London setting and the pacing of the mission. It starts off with fast-paced stealth and quickly develops into a series of intense firefights against Makarov's allies. They chase the hostiles into the subway system, and a frenetic, escape chase ensues. It's a really fun spectacle, and what I like most about it is that it actually switches up the gameplay. Your vehicle desperately tries to follow the racing subway cars, and you're constantly changing positions, trying to target your enemies through narrow windows as support pillars race by and block your view. It's a unique shootout that adds to the game's variety. The chase ends with another explosive finale, with the subway careening off the rails and tumbling through the tire with quite a few rotations. This is a great example of Modern Warfare 3's excess. The chase sequence was already high octane and exciting. The train derailment doesn't add anything to the experience. The SAS operators could have just as easily followed the hostiles up the escalators without the train derailment. It feels contrived. And worse still, it contributes to that feeling of Modern Warfare 3 being predictable and monotone in its delivery of big set pieces. Twisting the words of our good friend Syndrome from The Incredibles, if all of Modern Warfare 3's set pieces are special, then none of them are. SAS manages to reach the truck, but there are more trucks. They are too late. A father records his wife and daughter as they gaze upon Big Ben. They're tourists clearly visiting the city. They're in the wrong place at the wrong time. There's a van parked in front of them. This van explodes. Horrible screams follow as toxic gas spills out of its remains. Your wife lies dead in front of you. This is a ghastly, horrible scene. It's Modern Warfare 3's big shock moment, like the nuclear detonation from Modern Warfare 1 or No Russian from Modern Warfare 2. It's showing our hero's failure in one way or another and the consequences that brings. Unfortunately, I don't think this scene is as effective as either prior shock moment. The shock moments of those games were woven very naturally into their narratives. In both cases, you play as a character that has already been introduced in the game, Paul Jackson and Private Allen respectively. The horrible events that follow feel like a natural progression of their stories. Furthermore, although the scenes are definitely aiming for shock value, don't get me wrong, There's a lot more going on in them. In the case of No Russian, the airport massacre also serves as our introduction to Makarov, and it characterizes him. To build on that, it's setting up the conflict of the entire game. The fact that Alan is an unwilling participant too is another layer of tragedy which makes the incident very captivating. In this London scene, however, this family is introduced in the very scene where they're killed. We don't have time to build any sense of familiarity with them, like Jackson or Alan. But worse than that, it has the effect of making the scene feel contrived. As the player, you get the sense that the developers are deliberately trying to pull your heartstrings by introducing a cute little family and then immediately wiping them out. It's hard to get immersed in a scene when you can see the developer moving behind the curtains. I think this scene is emblematic of the difficulty that MW3 has in following up its predecessors. Its predecessors had shocking scenes, so shocking that they made waves in the news cycles. So of course Modern Warfare 3 has to have a shocking scene of its own, right? But after a nuclear bomb and a vile airport massacre, where's there really to go? You can't match the scale of the nuke, and you can't match the horror of the airport massacre. I think Modern Warfare 3 would have been better to skip this scene, and instead just show the toxin via the perspective of the SAS operators. However, had they gone down that path, who knows? Maybe Modern Warfare 3 would have been criticized for not having a shocking scene like its predecessors. It's a no-win situation, I guess, and it demonstrates just how difficult of a job Modern Warfare 3 had in following up its predecessors. Makarov's gas attack was not indiscriminate terror, it served a military purpose. The attacks were intended to cripple Europe's defensive and pave the way for an invasion, which enemy forces begin in no short order. US forces deploy in Europe to help the defensive effort. As Frosted Delta Force, the player pushes back against the enemy tide. This is another one of my favorite missions in not just this game, but the entire series. Again, that's part of what makes this game so difficult to talk about. I do love it, and sometimes it's hard to get that across while also critiquing it. This mission just really is classic meat and potatoes Call of Duty action. The mission communicates the sheer scale of the conflict well. There are so many friendly forces on your side, and so many enemies in opposition, that it creates the feeling of a large-scale battle better than just about any other franchise. The ruined city atmosphere is so detailed and well realized too, really adding to the sense of this great, terrible war unfolding. The skybox too verges on the post-apocalyptic, and it adds to the melancholy and chaos. In this mission's primary set piece, you take the minigun seat of a tank. The tank has to plow through parking garages in order to get through the enemy lines. It's good gameplay-wise, as the close quarters nature of the turret segment paired with the tank's very well tanky movement is a unique feeling segment. In addition, the set piece is cool, and I actually think it exercises more restraint than the other set pieces. It's intense, but it doesn't dip into that same realm of extremeness as the prior missions. There isn't a runaway subway tumbling down a tunnel, or a plane splitting in half, or power sliding down a mountain as buildings crumble on top of you. It just feels like it fits the mission naturally, if that makes sense. The mission ends with Delta recovering the vice president who was being held hostage. Price contacts Baseplate in London. Through their conversation, we find out that Baseplate is actually Macmillan from the first game. This is a great callback, but it also works well from a story perspective. It explains why Baseplate is willing to give Price information even though Price is officially blacklisted. They trace the shipment back to a smuggler named Warabe in Somalia. Price and his men go to knock on his door and figure out where Makarov is. This is another one of my favorite missions. See, I told you I'd say that a lot, didn't I? 141 storms the compound, guns blazing. A storm looms on the horizon, which creates a foreboding atmosphere. We've got to get in and out quickly, or that storm is going to land on us. 141 makes their way up the beach, aided by a chopper turret. 141 reaches Warabe, and Price interrogates him for Makarov's location. He unleashes a canister of gas that London was just hit with, and Warabe is terrified. This is a great piece of storytelling because his fear does a great job of communicating the threat that this gas presents. If even this warlord and murderer is terrified of the gas, then it must be pretty bad, right?
Look familiar.
No, please!
He relents, but Price doesn't have any mercy on him. It's understandable given that it was his own home that was just victimized. It's also a reminder that 141 is disavowed. They aren't doing things by the book. 141 makes for exfil, but they're too late. The sandstorm falls upon them. This is my favorite set piece in the game, and one of my favorites in the entire series. This is for a few reasons. First, it has a unique impact on gameplay. Visibility is almost completely cut off, which results in difficulty in finding your enemies. They're shadows against the brown and black haze, most easily discerned by their muzzle flashes, but that's only after they've started firing at you. Your own muzzle flashes are incredibly bright by the contrast, further reducing visibility. It means that the set piece, while also providing a unique atmosphere and presentation, also provides an interesting gameplay experience. Second, it works from a storytelling perspective. This set piece was established really well at the beginning of the level, so the sandstorm sequence feels like a natural progression of both the level and the story. It ups the intensity of the level's finale. Lastly, the atmosphere is just cool. The developers managed to execute the sandstorm well, and the way the sun pokes out of the darkness is eerie. It almost feels like you're on another planet. All in all, I guess, the sequence feels like an interesting spin on the environmental hazard presented by the EMP blast in Modern Warfare 2. It feels novel in a way that a lot of the other set pieces in Modern Warfare 3 don't. Okay, enough about the sandstorm. Price's men make it out. The warlord gave them a name, Volk, who is Makarov's bomb maker. Price can't make it to Paris before he bolts, so he asks Sandman's unit to bag him. I'm kind of curious as to why Price trusts Sandman so much. After General Shepard's betrayal, you think he'd be a bit more suspicious about working with others. It adds intrigue, I suppose, as it feels like the two have a bit of a history because of this trust. But maybe I'm just reading too much into it. Price needs Volk captured and he can't do it himself, so out of necessity he has to ask someone else anyway. Delta Force drops into Paris and begins the hunt for Volk. This mission, Bag and Drag, is my favorite in the game, and one of my top missions in the entire series. Why do I love this mission so much? Well, a lot of it is personal. My post-apocalyptic book series, the Northfield Saga, takes place in a world drowning in toxic gas, and the characters have to strap on gas masks to venture outside. So in a lot of ways, this mission feels like playing a chapter out of my book, which is cool. But personal biases aside, I love the atmosphere anyway. There's something about contrasting the beautiful streets and architecture of Paris with the post-apocalyptic ruins and toxic gas that I find very captivating. There's also a ton of variety to the combat in this mission, facilitated by the level design. You shimmy across building ledges, fight through broken buildings, drop onto the city streets mid-fight, battle through sewer tunnels, and so on. There is a verticality to this level not seen in many others, and the changing locations create this sense of energy and movement to the level. The mission ends with a desperate car chase after Volk, where the player has to fend off waves of enemy vehicles and a persistent helicopter. I would be remiss if I didn't mention how this mission once more has another high-octane slow-mo finale. It just doesn't excite, not after the litany of other finales we've experienced like this up to this point. Even my favorite level isn't immune of this criticism. They capture Volk, but now they need to get out of the city. Unfortunately, their exfil ship is shot down. See what I mean about excess? We just had a scene of a car tumbling through midair, and not 5 minutes later, this aircraft crashes, blowing up about 30 cars in the process. When exciting events like this are overused, they just become boring. Delta still needs to exfil. Their enemies aren't going to give them an easy time, but that's where a friendly AC-130 comes into play. This segment is a callback to the AC-130 sequence from Modern Warfare, but with a few twists to keep things interesting. The first change-up is the setting. This section takes place in the urban streets of Paris, in contrast to the open rural area in the first game. The buildings obstruct your view, and you have to be a bit more strategic about which targets to hit, because the AC-130's flight path can make certain targets inaccessible. During the scripted moments when the AC-130 has to target a building, it also makes for a bigger spectacle. Perspective switches between Delta Force and the AC-130 throughout the level. This switch up also works well because it provides contrast between the intimate struggle of the soldiers on the ground and the broader scope of the AC-130. Lastly, there are more enemy vehicles, which require switching up the AC-130 weapons to properly target. In total, there are enough changes to make this AC-130 segment feel fresh rather than just a retread of prior ground. Perspective switches to Delta Force one last time as they fight across a bridge over the Seine River. Delta engages in a desperate battle against enemies as they await exfil. The bruised and battered Eiffel Tower looms in the background. Eventually, the tower takes too much of a beating. In the level's finale, the tower collapses. It's maybe the biggest skill set piece in the game, and unfortunately, I think it serves as the greatest monument to the game's excess. This tower collapse just doesn't do anything for me. It doesn't impact the story at all, and it doesn't add anything gameplay-wise. You just watch it collapse. Its only purpose is to serve as a point of excitement, as a point of destructive impact. However, we've had plenty of that up until this point, haven't we? There's been explosion after explosion and rune after rune. This scene just leaves me feeling numb. As impressive as the collapse is on a technical level, I think if you just took it out of the game and simply ended with the Delta Force operators exfiltrating from the bridge, the game doesn't lose much. This is where Modern Warfare 3 stumbles. For how much spectacle Modern Warfare 1 and 2 had, I always sense an intentionality and calculation to each set piece. They served a specific narrative, emotional, or gameplay purpose. Modern Warfare 3 doesn't have that same intentionality. If there's an opportunity to go bigger, Modern Warfare 3 takes it, not bothering to ask whether it's the right choice. The game feels trapped in this need to outdo its predecessors to its detriment. Delta Force pulls information out of Volk and passes it to 141. Makarov is meeting with advisors in London. Naturally, Price and his men are going to hunt him down. The mission opens with Price and Soap waiting in the sewers, with Price smoking a cigar. This feels very reminiscent of Modern Warfare's Crew Expendable mission. Modern Warfare 3 nails the callbacks to prior games. There are enough to make the world feel cohesive across games and drive a sense of nostalgia, but there's not enough to make it feel overdone or contrived. It's a rare case where I'll compliment Modern Warfare 3 on having restraint. 141 sneaks under the docks. There's good storytelling here both under and above the docks. People are being gunned down and water is filled with bodies. It communicates the human cost of the war and underscores the priority once more to end the conflict as soon as possible. Yuri sneaks through the city with Soap, darting through corridors and army crawling across floors, with nearby enemies none the wiser. It was at this point where I started to feel a tinge of boredom at the stealth sequences. This setup of following a point character with a sniper worked great in All Gillied Up, but the format starts to get old after a while. Modern Warfare 3 does feel like it has a higher number of these missions than its predecessors, probably as an attempt to balance out the bigger set pieces, and the frequent use of rainy environments worsens the repetition. I don't know. Modern Warfare 2's cliffhanger mission had a really cool stealth segment where you snuck through a snowstorm with a heartbeat sensor. It was a lot more hands-off, with you able to more or less pick your own path. I wish Modern Warfare 3 would have tried to innovate its stealth sections more, or go down more of that route. Anyways, I digress. The mission does get loud in one of the coolest moments in the game. Price's friends show up, emerging out of the shadows.
Nice timing, old man. Once that made believe with 4 men and they've got dozens. Don't worry, I've brought some friends.
I will say this is a pretty hype way to ramp up excitement. The rest of the mission is a fun, if standard, fight through urban London. I'm all for a meat and potatoes battle, so no complaints from me here. Price's men reach the rendezvous point, and they await Makarov's arrival.
Which vehicle will he be in?
They constantly rotate for security. We won't know until he steps out.
You seem to know a lot about Makarov.
This moment does a great job of building intrigue. We know so little about Yuri, and Soap's suspicion reinforces that. Once Makarov arrives, they strike. There's a cool segment where Yuri provides overwatch for Price. Things go south when the elevator opens, and they see Kamarov tied up. This was all a trap laid by Makarov. Price isn't the only one caught in Makarov's net.
Yuri, my friend, you never should have come here.
What the hell is he talking about? Get out now!
The suspense around Yuri continues to build, but there's no time to dwell. The tower explodes, and Soap and Yuri plummet to the ground. Yuri comes to, only to discover Soap badly wounded. Price and Yuri make a desperate escape, while Makarov's men close in on them. The entire level is very reminiscent of Modern Warfare's one-shot, one-kill mission. There's a sniper sequence in a tower, followed by a frenetic chase sequence where you have to help your injured ally. The callback is definitely noticeable, but the mission still feels fresh because the context is different. Price succeeded at his mission the first time around, while we failed this time. Once more, I think it's a tactful callback to prior games while not overly relying on nostalgia. It all works too because the mission is so well executed. This mission is perhaps the most intense out of any in the series. You feel outgunned and vulnerable, and the enemy waves feel truly endless. Watching Soap 2 is a difficult experience. He continues to rally, then fall, then rally again. It leaves you guessing as to whether he'll survive this fight or not. The rallying gives way to hope, which gives way to despair again as you see Soap falter. It's a roller coaster moving up and down, but more down than up. One constant is the river of blood that follows Soap throughout the mission. Whenever he sits for rest and gets up again, the blood pool he leaves behind is tragic. They get Soap to a safe house, but it's too late. He's bled out for too long, too fast. The last thing he tells Price is that Yuri knows Makarov.
Price, you need to know Makarov knows Yuri. Oh no, 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 no! Soap! No, no, no! Soap! You have to go now! Get off me!
His death is quicker and more understated than some of the other deaths in the series, especially for such an important character, but it feels right here. Soap was all about accomplishing the mission just like Price, and you'd want Price to focus on finishing the mission. Their enemies converge, so Price and Yuri flee, but once they hit the stairs, Price strikes. He wants to know why Yuri knows Makarov, then a sequence of flashbacks follow. Speaking of the one-shot, one-kill mission, we see that Yuri was actually present in Ukraine when Price took the shot that wounded Zakayev. He was by Makarov's side even. He was by Makarov's side again in the Middle East. And we discover that it was Makarov who greenlit the nuke which took so many lives. Since Yuri is at his side at such a pivotal moment, it's clear that Makarov trusted him and that they were close friends. This relationship falls through though, and Yuri betrays Makarov. At first, it's not apparent what this is over. Makarov shoots Yuri and leaves him for dead. Yuri crawls into an elevator. When it opens, we hear screams. It's the fateful airport massacre, which kicked the entire war into high gear. Yuri picks up a gun and he tries to stop the madness, but he's too injured. He collapses. I like these flashbacks. They provide just enough for you to put the pieces together. Yuri stood by as Makarov's antics grew increasingly violent. From Yuri's history as ex-Spetsnaz, I assume he was fighting for love over his country. A patriot. When Makarov turned his gun on his own people, massacring Russian innocents, it was too far for Yuri. Makarov was forsaking the entire reason they assumedly fought. It's when Yuri realized Makarov was self-interested and evil and despised him for all the violence he committed. Price is satisfied enough with the explanation and he lets Yuri live for now. Price speaks with baseplate and we see a moment of mourning for him, which is rare.
There's a clock tower in Hereford where the names of the dead are inscribed. We try to honor their deeds, even as their faces fade from our memory. Those memories are all that's left when the bastards have taken everything else.
What happened?
He killed Soap. He's gone, Mac.
What do you need from me, son?
Price isn't a touchy-feely guy, so his sentiment here shows how much Soap meant to him, even if he didn't express it much in words. Yuri gives Price a location, an old castle in Prague. Makarov could be hiding there. Price gets gear from Macmillan and they head out. Price and Yuri infiltrate the castle under the cover of rain and darkness. Once more, it's a stealth mission where you're being escorted by a superior with a thunderstorm setting. See what I mean about the mission design getting a bit samey after a while? Repetition aside, this mission is incredibly well done. The stealth segment is tense without overstaying its welcome. Once they hit the castle, it's guns blazing. Since it's only Price and Yuri here, this mission has a different feel than the others. You're not being backed by a force of allies. In order to stand a chance, Price and Yuri have to be smart, and they plan explosives to cover their exit. They stick to the shadows, avoiding patrols, and they scale some support beams. They find Makarov, but not in person. He's interrogating the Russian president for the nuclear launch codes, but he won't break. Makarov sends men after the president's daughter, who they've discovered is in Berlin. They need to protect her, otherwise Makarov will use her for leverage against the president. With that intel, Price and Yuri make their leave. I love this escape fight. It really does feel like you and Price are against the whole world, but because of the preparations Price and Yuri made beforehand, it somehow doesn't feel overly ridiculous. Again, this is just what makes Modern Warfare 3 so difficult to critique at times. Each mission individually is so fun, but the cumulative effect, like the repetition in this case, can cast a shadow. Nikolai picked them up and they escape. Delta moves in to rescue the president's daughter. The mission starts off in media res, with Frost recovering from being stunned in the ruins of a building. Sandman desperately ushers you on. This builds intrigue as the mission flashes back 20 minutes prior. Delta Force flies into the conflict, and the player witnesses the widespread ruin and destruction of Berlin. Smoke engulfs the sky, and half the buildings are carcasses. Modern Warfare 3 does a good job of showing the progressive destruction of the war over time, showcasing its damaging and disastrous consequences. Delta lands and fights onto the roof, where we provide overwatch from a building adjacent to the President's daughter. We're protecting Granite Team as they move in to extract the target. There's an explosion though, and Granite Team is unresponsive. Sandman's team moves into the rescue. An intense battle ensues, where Delta uses tanks as mobile cover to wedge their way through enemy forces. Another explosion rocks a ruined building beside them, and the building collapses on Delta Force. Here we resume where the introduction started, and fight through the wreckage to reach the President's daughter. There's a really cool moment where Frost takes Sandman's pistol and takes out the enemies. They're too late though. Makarov's men pull her out. Things are looking bad. Makarov now has the leverage he needs. They track the helo to a diamond mine in Siberia. They have one last chance to rescue the President and his daughter before Makarov turns the continent into glass. Delta Force and 141 team up for the operation. It's cool to see our two POV teams throughout the game join forces. It's like the Avengers assembling. This is a great high-intensity mission with tons of variety. There are dark night vision skirmishes, large-scale conflicts with the aid of Predator missiles, and everything in between. They manage to get the President and his daughter out, but at a cost. Sandman stays behind to cover their exit. Price has Anguish, but there's no time. The exfil as the diamond mine explodes underneath them. I think this explosive finale works well. Aside from capstoning the climax, it also communicates the death of Sandman, since there's no way him and his men are making it out. So there's a layer of tragedy that makes this explosion more resonant than some of the others in the game. With the President and his daughter saved, the war can finally end. He begins negotiations with NATO and all hostilities cease. All seems well and good, but there's one more loose end to tie up: Makarov. Price and Yuri raid the Oasis Hotel. Makarov awaits on the top floor. Once more, they're two men pitted against a small army, but this time they're aided by juggernaut suits. Movement is slowed, but the men are much more durable. It's a cool segment that mixes up gameplay in an interesting way at the 11th hour. It makes me wish that there were some juggernaut enemies in the campaign to spice up the enemy variety, or that we got to use the juggernaut suits more ourselves. They're shot at in the elevator, and they have to ditch their juggernaut suits to transfer to another elevator. A time trial follows, where they have to reach Makarov before he escapes. The firefights are intense because of the time limit, and you constantly have to push forward. The helicopter comes back for another strafing run, and the floor gives out under them. Yuri is impaled, but he urges Price to continue on. Makarov boards the helicopter, but Price doesn't let them escape. He takes down the chopper. When he recovers, there's this cool shot of Price seeing his own reflection in the broken glass. Makarov approaches and gets the upper hand, but Yuri emerges and saves Price. Yuri is shot in the head and dies, but Price gets the opening he needs. He takes Makarov down in a brutal way, which communicates through body language the hatred and animus Price has towards him, the man who's caused the deaths of thousands upon thousands of people. Makarov is left swinging, and Price's job is done. He lights a cigar, taking a moment to breathe. With that, the game ends. There are a lot of explosions and set pieces in this final mission, but given Modern Warfare 3's love of flair, it ends up being a pretty quiet, almost intimate ending. There are no world-ending stakes. It's just Price, Yuri, and Makarov finishing this conflict after the fires of war have dimmed. I think it works because of that. The ending is also abrupt. As soon as Makarov is killed, the credits roll. There is no aftermath or follow-up. I remember this striking me as odd when I first played all those years ago. However, I think it's a perfect ending for the series. Modern Warfare and Modern Warfare 2 also ended as soon as the immediate threats of Zakhaev and Shepard were vanquished. Modern Warfare 3 following that same pattern feels right. Price too is such a mission-focused guy, so a story ending when the mission ends is also appropriate. With that, we've reached the end. I think it's clear that Modern Warfare 3 struggled with where to go after its predecessors, and it leaned too heavily on explosions and set pieces to seem bigger. There are some areas where restraint could have definitely been used. For instance, removing some of the extraneous set pieces like the train derailment in the London mission could have let some of the other set pieces shine more brightly. However, it very well could have been the case that removing some of these set pieces could have resulted in Modern Warfare 3 being criticized for being less exciting. I don't know. It's a sign that perhaps Modern Warfare 3 was aiming at the wrong goal. Maybe it shouldn't have even tried to go bigger than Modern Warfare 2, and instead scaled things back to a more restrained Modern Warfare 1 feel. Then again, as I mentioned at the beginning, the third installment of a trilogy is expected to be the biggest, so any toning down may not have received the kindest reception either. I don't know, it's honestly hard to say what Modern Warfare 3 should have done differently. It feels like a no-win situation in a lot of ways. I'm not sure there's a world in which Modern Warfare 3 made everyone happy. It's for this reason that I give Modern Warfare 3's flaws a lot of grace. Despite the headwinds coming their way, the developers put together a solid game with masterful craftsmanship. Despite the imperfections, it's a satisfying end to the trilogy, and at the end of the day, can I really ask for more than that? I do love this game. I hope that came across in the video, and if it didn't, well, I suppose that's a difficulty when critiquing a work. Revisiting your old favorites comes with a risk. There is a chance that the games you love don't live up to the memories you have of them. When revisiting the Modern Warfare Trilogy though, the opposite happened for me. I walked away with an even greater appreciation for the craftsmanship of the series. And even when it does, it's because the series is pushing to be ever bigger and ever bolder, venturing to new explosion-laden horizons. I find that ambition endearing, even when it doesn't always pan out the way the developers intended. This series easily makes it onto the list of the best first-person shooter trilogies of all time for me, and it's certainly been influential, as the years have proven. I hope you enjoyed the video as much as I enjoyed making it. Thanks for watching. If you want to support me further, please consider liking and subscribing, or checking out my Northfield series. I'd love to hear what you think of the trilogy and the series as a whole in the comments. Until next time.